Welcome to Exception Seekers, the show where we challenge conventional views on youth mental health and explore stories and experiences that offer alternative perspectives. I am joined today by Jake Ernst, who is a social worker from Toronto. He's a clinical counselor, but also director of a family mental health team called Straight Up. Educator, podcaster, wears a number of different hats. And so, Jake, thank you for joining today.
I am so excited to be here. I'm really excited to talk about all things teen mental health.
Me too. Me too. Maybe to start us off, you refer to yourself as a relational therapist. And so maybe we could start there with what that means and what drew you into that work.
I think about our work just in general. And if we kind of just zoom out, our work with young people and our work maybe just in general in psychotherapy spaces is to help people create psychological change. That really is at the core of psychotherapy.
Mhm.
And then I think about the other task that we have, which is our job of helping people be with each other. And I think it is becoming a lot harder for us to exist in shared spaces. And I find that so interesting, given that we are a social species and a relational species at the end of the day, that we evolved to be in groups. I think just the way the world is right now, it's becoming just a lot harder for people to be together. I think about rates of friendship are declining, right? Teens are going out with their friends a lot less throughout the week. Um, Rates of separation and divorce are increasing. Rates of loneliness are increasing. And
Mhm.
so I think we're at a point now where we have to declare something, which is that we're not just a social species. We're an ultra social species, which
Mhm.
means that we don't just need each other for to have fun and to play games and like to be together. We
Mhm.
actually need each other to survive. It is fundamental to our species. And so I think about the people that I work with, that we work with, and the approach that is needed in these times is not to help people retreat back into themselves. I think our job is to help people be in relationships. And so I think the fundamental work is helping to create psychological change through that process of creating corrective emotional experiences with safe other people. And I
Mhm.
think that in our work, whether that's in community work or in group therapy or couples therapy or individual therapy, it's all relational. It's all relational. And I think at the end of the day, I just want to contribute to a field and I want to be part of healing work, where at its core, we are helping people be in healthy relationships.
Like, how did you reach that perspective where you sort of had this in mind as you were doing your Bachelor of Social Work and Masters and sort of trying to gain more knowledge in that? Or did some of that come through your own clinical practice or exposure to other ideas? Like, how did you come to see this need for that ultra connection?
As I was saying, we're a social species.
Hmm.
But I'm also seeing that, just the way the current world is structured, I think like technology has a lot to do with it. I think
Hmm.
the changing world has a lot to do with it. I think geopolitically, there's a lot there. There's also COVID and the impact of that on a lot of folks.
Yeah.
Just becoming a lot more solo, a lot more of a solo species where we feel as though we have to kind of look out for our own best interests and we have to
Mhm.
tough it out and do this hyper individualism thing where we just try to take care of ourselves and use self-care hopefully to knuckle our way through. I just like to resist against that because I don't think that we should have to do it alone and we shouldn't have to go at it alone.
Mhm.
And a lot of this is informed by my background in neuroscience. I did a neuroscience degree, and so I know a lot about just how the brain is supposed to, quote unquote, develop
Okay. Yeah.
in healthy environments. And I think that we of course want to help people get access to that fair shot at healthy development,
Hmm.
and that is becoming a lot harder to do. And so I think what I started to see was a whole population of kids, so young people struggling to figure out how to do this development thing, this growing up thing, in an age where a lot of the adults didn't really know a lot about the environment and the landscapes that they were in. And so I
Hmm.
think back to my social work education, where of course we learn a lot about systems and about how our environments really do impact how we grow, how we develop, how we learn,
Hmm.
how we feel safe, how we express ourselves in groups. And I'm just thinking about the ways that if the adults around us don't feel regulated, don't feel like they're connected to self, then how are the kids going to stand a chance at learning how to do that? And so I
Hmm.
just think about the relational process of development that it is inherently relational,
Hmm.
and how many kids are missing out on this fundamental piece of this puzzle, which is co-regulation, that ability to be
Right.
around other people and to become regulated by being around other people and specifically around regulated other people. And
Yes.
so I often say in my work is that kids cannot regulate themselves when they're surrounded by dysregulated adults. And unfortunately, that just is one of the norms of parenting these days, is that it's a really high stress time. It's really hard to raise kids in this changing world. The technology layer is a
Hmm.
personal interest of mine.
Hmm.
And I'm just interested just in how then do we take on this task of helping kids develop healthy, balanced brains when us as adults don't feel as though we 100% have that healthy, balanced brain.
I love that, we can't expect kids to do it when they're surrounded by dysregulated adults. That needs to just be, we need a billboard somewhere of that because I think there's often, working a lot with young people, children, teens, there's often this sense of, parents wanting to help. And so, connecting them with us, which is wonderful. But sometimes with the idea of, then it's on them to be able to learn these skills to regulate themselves or figure that out, which, is a piece of it, but within context and within, yes, all the other systems, it's tricky. It's a full piece perspective of change that has to slowly happen.
It's also quite sad at times because I find that there's a grief in it for me that I think that if we don't, maybe it's a personal pressure, I'm not sure, but there's a grief that I carry with it just alongside of this task, right, of helping kids grow up healthy. And the grief for me is that I don't know that we have all, or many of us haven't received childhoods that we
Mhm.
could sort into the bin of healthy, well-developed brains, right? A lot
Right.
of us have
Right.
also had our own experiences of
Hmm.
being parented or growing up, in school systems that are that don't always serve the needs or serve kids in the best way. And
Hmm.
then we come into workplaces, and now we're in a culture that doesn't always, again, love us the same way that we want it to. And
Yeah.
so I think that
Mhm.
naturally our work in our healing work, there is an element of grief always in healing work. That
Hmm.
we're always coming to terms with loss and change and grieving sort of
Hmm.
the expectations of this promise of a healthy, happy life.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I think a lot of our work is helping kids adjust to the reality that is, not the one that that should be, quote unquote.
You mentioned around the digital, technology layer and how that is an interest of yours. And I know you've done, because I follow everything you do, I know you've done some work with sick kids, their professional development branch that they have. Um, Tell me, I'm curious, like, tell me a little bit about what is it about that that's drawn you in, and where do you see the need for research in that area going?
It's such an interesting development of and whole like new set of studies are coming out about this important relationship with our
Hmm.
technology, our own personal smartphone devices, or even just the screens that we use. I
Hmm.
really like the way that Dr. Christine Rosen talks about it. She's a historian, and she talks about how she has a book that's called The Extinction of Experience. And she talks about how we're losing out on really key experiences that we need, especially in childhood, when we live a screen mediated life. And it's at the
Hmm.
risk of having this disembodiment effect, where we're just becoming so disconnected from each other and from ourselves that it's almost
Yes.
like we're just living in this alternate sort of reality. And so she talks
Yeah.
about the four key experiences that we're losing in our world when things are just so screen mediated. And so she talks about spontaneity, community, patience, and risk. And I
Ooh.
do I read
Yeah.
that and I just thought like, wow, I just see that so clearly in the people I work with.
Hmm.
And then I also think back to another plot point in this story. Back in 2019, when I opened up my clinic, this was before the pandemic, I was delivering this young, distractible young boy out back to his family out in my waiting room
Hmm.
after I was working with him. And I arrived at our waiting room table. And so the way that my waiting room is set up is we have magazines scattered around the table so that people can pick them up. And um, uh, it's sort of like a family style uh,
Sure.
waiting space. And
Hmm.
so I'm bringing him back out, and his mom is sitting there on her phone, and a baby is on the mom's lap, and the infant daughter is scrolling on a magazine as if it's an iPad. And
Oh, right.
I thought to myself, wow, okay, so there's something here. There's something interesting here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that she was bringing him to talk to me about his technology use and how he was, in her words, addicted and really latched onto the
Mm-hmm.
iPad at home. And I thought, wow, okay, there's a relational system that's at play here. And
Mm-hmm.
me working with him in solo isn't going to fully address the root of this problem. And so I personally was just doing a lot more research on the relationship between technology and well-being at the time. And I just thought that was so fascinating, just as like that I was seeing it all happen right there. And
Mm-hmm.
so that sort of sparked this personal interest in just how technology is changing the way that we are thinking, the way that we're relating, the way that we're
Mm-hmm.
communicating. And
Mm-hmm.
all the research that I've done, it's clarifying a really important point, which is that it is completely overriding our key social emotional muscles that we need
Mm-hmm.
in order to develop. And it's replacing a lot of the really important functions of the human nervous system
Mm-hmm.
that come to us for free.
Mm-hmm. It, I'll date myself, but I am that bracket that didn't have it and then had it. So, and I resisted for a long time too. I didn't have a cell phone until like fourth year university. So it just wasn't a part of my childhood. So I look back on a lot of things, right? And I see it differently. And so that now parenting a child, it's a tricky piece for me with I can control things at home, but then they go to school
Yeah.
and it's that technology use at school that I find interesting. And also, that's the part that almost unsettles me more because I think there's different uses for it. And for sure, sometimes it's like great modifications for kids for learning and new, like there's wonderful pieces of it, definitely. And there's sit and have lunch and watch TV. I struggle with that side of things. And so I know there's some research out, like, anxious generation for sure, right? If we can, on social media use, but more home-based personal use. Is it moving in the education direction too, of like what does that look like in schools or use, or where do you see that piece? Or is there a piece for that?
I love this question. It's also a common question that I get often. I would say it's twofold. So number one, we have screens for different purposes. So there's,
Mhm.
of course, our computers versus our smartphones. And
Right.
so I am a big proponent of getting smartphones out of schools.
Mhm.
And as far as I'm concerned, a school is not phone free until it's bell to bell, meaning that kids do not have access to it. 'Cause
Not that like here at recess or on the breaks, right?
exactly. Or
Yeah.
here you can have it at lunch, or you can have it in your pocket and then sneak to the bathroom and use it. Number one, we need to really get that right. And as far
Mhm.
as I'm concerned, even though Ontario has gone phone free at this time, I don't think that we have phone free schools.
Yeah.
Right. So, and
Yeah.
we're not really in practice applying policy in a way that I think should be most effective and most efficient
Hmm.
to really undo, unfortunately, the effects of this.
Hmm.
Then we, of course, have the laptops, and laptops have just become such a big part of education that with a ton of investments in education have resulted in a lot of school boards now having Chromebooks and,
Yep.
of course, personal computers for every student. And, I think that kids have grown accustomed to this, which is that a lot of their work is digitized and a lot of it is virtual,
Hmm.
meaning that a lot of them haven't practiced the pen and paper system as well as maybe we had done. And so this is resulting in an interesting effect where now we're starting to grow concern about, okay, well, why do we need to have so many screens? Originally, it was sort of promised as the training wheels that would help us ride the bike. We actually thought it was going to make kids smarter. We thought it was going to help
Right.
them learn more efficiently and effectively. But it
Hmm.
turns out that we've actually just lowered the bar on things like communication. And we've also really lowered our standards, right, on things like
Hmm.
executive functions and planning and thinking deeply about things. Because now a lot of these computers have things like grammar corrections or AI tools that just swoop in and help them help their brain do some of the thinking for them. So I
Hmm.
think there's that whole piece of the conversation. The conversation that I am mostly primarily considered with at this time is more a conversation about algorithms and how algorithms are taking over our attention span and making us more distracted and more distressed and more disconnected.
Hmm.
And so I think about one of the main reasons why I think having smartphones out of schools is because it eliminates the short form content scroll on the
Yeah.
smartphones. And then also, even now, laptops are, of course, being infiltrated by the algorithms, things that are just
Mhm.
so automated and turning us into passive technology users, where we're
Mhm.
actually not just flexing and moving the muscles in our brain that we need in order to have healthy brains. And
Right.
so,
Mhm.
that doesn't even touch the other um, piece of this puzzle, right? Which is that
Yep.
there are so many ways that technology in schools, just like things like Apple Watches and all of that, that just really AirPods that really have dominated our lives.
Well, I like your distinction, right? Of, there's the social media, smartphone screens, and then there's like computer screens, but also kind of to your point there of there's passive use and then there's like intentional use of trying
Exactly.
to and so we can consciously use, but then for kids when you're still developing that, skill of skepticism and like critically consuming information.
In my work, I make a distinction between active use and passive use. So
Right, okay.
active use would be when we are using technology. Passive use is when technology is using us. So
Right.
this is when an algorithm is a part of our use. So
Right.
there's actually no research that shows that active pro-social use is
Hmm.
harmful for the developing brain. So if you're, using search engines to go and seek out information and get
Right.
access to more information, if you're doing the searching and seeking yourself, then that's not bad. That's a part of learning. That's a part of
Hmm.
research. That's a part of getting more information or clarifying facts. But
Hmm.
when the computer is doing that, so whether it's an algorithm that's pushing it to you,
Hmm.
whether on TikTok and pushing you new content, or if it's AI that's completely doing all the thinking for you, then we're passively consuming that technology, meaning that we're
Yes.
we're just not building or using those same skills.
So in your sharing of this information, because you present at school, like not just for parents, but for students and young people you're in at schools, and just in general around youth mental health, teen mental health, what do you think are some misconceptions that are out there that some predominant, I don't know, narratives surrounding that, if you have the chance to kind of bust some myths,
Mhm.
what do you think? What do you hear that you think we need to change our viewpoint on this?
This might be controversial, but I'm happy to stand by my
Okay,
claims.
give it to me.
Um,
I love it.
I'm I'm pretty done with the whole self-regulation concept at this
Hmm.
point. I
I want to like cheer right now.
yeah.
And okay, yes, I'm here for this. Let's
I,
hear
I
it.
I know it's a controversial claim, but I regulation is relational and co-regulation is a prerequisite for self-regulation. So in
Mhm.
order to self-regulate and to self-manage, so for us to be able to do that by ourselves, we have to first have received that blueprint of co-regulation from our primary attachment figures. So these are, of course, our caregivers,
Mhm.
first and foremost in early childhood. But then, of course, that it gets outsourced to other people like older adults and our friends. So we
Mhm.
get co-regulation from our community and from our social spaces. And so if someone is struggling with self-regulation, in my view, the goal is not to teach them individual self-regulation skills. The goal is to get them back in community and get them back in the blueprint of co-regulation because something happened along the way where they didn't get that script downloaded to them. Either that was from early attachment or developmental trauma, or
Mhm.
from maybe even from, having social ruptures throughout childhood, maybe at
Mhm.
school or, in their other third spaces that they go to, like hobbies and stuff like that. And so, in my mind, we need to start moving towards that place of co-regulation rather than expecting that kids should just be able to self-regulate and self-manage without
Mhm.
having some set of blueprints or tools that
Mhm.
is available to us again for free through relationships. And so, I
Mhm.
think getting kids involved in group activities and off of screens, which are very solo, right?
Mhm.
And solitary. We want to get kids as much as possible out into the waters of social health. So in my work, I use an acronym called MESH, mental, emotional, and social health. And I think that we've done a pretty good job having conversations with kids about their individual mental and emotional health. But the
Yes.
next conversation that we need to be having is one
Mhm.
about social health. And I really think that we got that wrong. We should have been having that conversation first with them
Mhm.
before talking with them about their own individual mental health. Because
Mhm.
developmentally, and especially in middle school and younger, the
Mhm.
whole job of that age is to get good at being in relationships, right? To
Mhm.
learn how to share, learn how to be a good friend, learn how
Yep.
to apologize when they mess up, or learn what it takes to keep a friend, right? Rather than just throw a friend in the garbage if it's not working. And so I,
Yes.
I think that social health is the next conversation. And that is another big myth that I would love to participate in the busting of, because I think that again we have moved to this territory of mental health, like self-care, self-regulation, and I'm kind of like, wait, no, no, no. We have to return back to our core, which is that we're an ultra social species that need each other. We need ourselves, but we need each other.
There are like I talk with so many young people who struggle with this, and and I it's been interesting seeing these different perspectives, and I can fully appreciate the parents and the teachers and the adults who just are so over the tantrums or over the big emotions, like because they get worn out, right? And
Yeah.
I
Yep.
can totally feel the like, I don't want this. I don't want to have to show up for this anymore. And I know how hard those kids are working to try to figure it out and how they need us to come to the table with
Yeah.
some skills and some support. And I think, acknowledging too how big friendship is,
Hmm.
so that, when someone has an argument with a friend, like that might be a really, really huge thing.
Yeah.
And, but we can look back and be like, yeah, you're in grade 4, like, or you're in grade 5, like how, yeah, you'll get another friend. It's like, wow, yeah. But
Totally.
that also could be that person's person. And so what we see sometimes as elementary school, just superficial relationships can also be like so important for that person.
Just as sort of like that social glue, right? That like holds us
Mm-hmm.
together throughout the
Mm-hmm.
day. Like we will take
Mm-hmm.
anything we can get sometimes, right? I heard
Yeah.
this really alarming stat the other day that found that middle schoolers and primary school students, some um, actually, sorry, it was a majority, more than 50% of kids go the entire day without making eye contact with an adult. And I just thought that was so sad, just so
Yes.
unfortunate, right? Because that is such an important source of correlation, right? To be able to like lock
Yes.
eyes with someone and say like, "Hey, I'm real. You're real too. And I
Mm-hmm.
see you
Mm-hmm.
and I know you. And hey, I know your name, or I'm checking in, or I'm looking at
Yes.
you and I'm attending to
Yes.
you."
Or even better, like I remember this thing you told me yesterday, and
Yeah.
I'm gonna just follow up on it, even if it was something
Yeah.
like really simple.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
it's that like really important ingredient of
Mm-hmm.
health, which is our to me, I call it the forgotten health indicator, that we've
Yeah.
just completely
Yep.
missed this whole idea that we actually need relationships, especially in
Yes.
early life, but throughout the life course.
Being a young person can be tough. Raising a young person can be tough. Whether it's school stress, family dynamics, or navigating challenging emotions, everyone needs the right support. That's where Sound Youth Counseling comes in. We specialize in helping children ages 4 and up through individual, parent, and family counseling tailored to meet each person's unique needs. From tackling tough issues at home or school to providing customized workshops and professional development for teachers and community leaders, we're here to make a difference. At Sound Youth Counseling, we believe young people deserve a safe, welcoming, and accepting space to grow and thrive, and every family deserves the tools to support them. If you're looking for support, visit soundyouthcounseling.ca and see how we can help. Sound Youth Counseling, empowering individuals, supporting families, and building stronger communities. If there was a parent or a teacher or an adult listening who spends time with young people and is just thinking, okay, like, what can I do if there were a couple things I could do to better support the young people in my life? What advice would you give? What
Hmm.
would be a step?
Maybe I can just define co-regulation and then I can provide an example and maybe a strategy. So, co-regulation is when we use our calm to help someone else achieve a state of calm also. And many adults are in this dilemma where ideally, in a healthy relational circumstance, kids are borrowing our calm so that they can become calm. But then
Hmm.
our batteries, they fill back up, right? So our
Hmm.
cup refills after our calm is borrowed.
Hmm.
Many adults feel as though their calm is being stolen from them. And so they feel as though kids are stealing all of their attentional capacities, all their resources, all the gas that they have in their tank. And
Hmm.
so I think that there is a shift here, which is that a lot of us do feel as though if I am helping you or giving too much to you, then it feels like my cup is being emptied permanently.
Hmm.
And so something to remind us of, which is that when we have healthy routines, maybe when we're eating well, we're like sleeping really well.
Hmm.
Sleep, of course, is a big part of this.
Hmm.
Our cup doesn't get emptied. We have this this supply, right, of resources to give to other people. And
Mhm.
so when kids, they look to us, they will go to the caregiver that has a full enough cup, right? But they don't typically go to the adults with the empty cups.
Mhm.
Some adults, just psychologically, also might prefer that, right? So there may be some sort of practice that goes into, well, I'm not going to be available to you so that you don't take things from me. You don't take my energy from me.
Mhm.
So what ideally what we want to do is to raise healthy kids and have healthy systems and healthy communities
Mhm.
is we have enough adults. It just takes one, especially in a school. It just takes one adult, one stable, calm nervous system for a
Mhm.
kid to also have their sustenance, right? Their relational nutrients that they need from other people. And
Yes.
so as we were just talking about, one example of that is simply making eye contact with someone, or simply like, getting on their level and saying, "Hey, how was recess today?" Or,
Mhm.
"Hey, what do you have going on later? I know it's at the end of the school year. You must have exams coming up." Things like
Right.
checking and just making sure that people feel like they're known and that they're seen is a really big
Mhm.
part of that. And so
Mhm.
I think about three big buckets that adults can think about: safety, belonging, and mattering. Those are our three entry points into helping kids co-regulate. And it turns out safety is very important, belonging is very important, but it turns out that mattering, especially, is one that gets
Mhm.
missed. This sort of sense that they have a meaningful significance to someone's life, meaning that their presence is known and their absence is felt. And
Mhm.
so something like when a kid is absent and when they return to school saying something like, "Hey, we missed you yesterday," is such a really important way of co-regulating them in this space, right? And bringing them back into
Mhm.
relational energy with you.
Mhm.
When a lot of these things get missed, or maybe we just have a lot on our plate, a lot of the safety, belonging, and mattering stuff just tends to fizzle away. And we
Yeah.
tend to not see it as important or essential to people's social health.
I just picture that from that example, right? I just picture this little person coming back into a class and someone saying like the teacher ideally or some, an adult being like, "Oh, we missed you," and just like how that would feel, right? Like,
Ah,
you
it's so
notice
good.
it's
And
gone. That's like so good and so simple, but so impactful.
one of my
Yeah.
main concerns right now is that we have outsourced a lot of what I'm describing to therapy. And so
Mhm.
we've tucked it away into the therapy room because for some reason we've had this new norm, which is that any sign of discomfort or any presence of feeling is a bad thing. And
Right.
so if you're having feelings, especially big feelings or big thoughts about something, then that's a task for a therapist and that's a
Right.
task for a mental health professional.
Right.
Um, Whereas the opposite, I think, should be true, which is that when we're having big feelings, when we're in that stormy situation, we
Hmm.
just need a safe, calm presence with somebody else. It doesn't have to be someone with an MSW or a mental health degree
Hmm.
to do that, right? Ideally, we can get that from each other and from our people, the
Hmm.
people who love and care about us, who check in on us.
Ideally, it's leveraging the relationships that young person already has that, exist, yes, within their community.
And so if we kind of come back full circle here on that conversation about technology, one of
Hmm.
my other main concerns right now is that we are now in this era of AI where AI is becoming agentic, meaning that it's not just an LLM like a chat GPT where it can just answer our questions. We're now in the age where AI is an LAM, a large action model, where it can start clicking on our behalf and doing things for us. So where we can start talking to Siri to say, "Hey Siri, can you send me a recipe for tacos. I'm going to have so and so over. Then I want you to send out the invites." And so she'll send the text message, she'll order the groceries,
Right.
she'll do everything for us.
Yes.
And so it is sort of lowering that bar on sort of the effort that we put into things.
Yep.
And it also runs the risk of becoming a replacement best friend, a replacement mentor, a replacement
Mm-hmm.
parent, a replacement teacher, someone or a piece of technology, not a someone, piece of technology that we can go to that
Hmm.
replicates very human-like circumstances, meaning that
Yes.
some people may develop a preference to go to AI for these things rather than to each other.
Mm. Sometimes I think how fascinating it will be, 5, 10 years from now to start reading what people are writing when they look back on even just that longer perspective, looking back on things that happened during COVID or just
Yeah.
politically at the time, or like all the things that were happening. I think, God, that'll be fascinating to hear. And sometimes I hope also within that isn't a like they just never saw it coming. Why didn't anybody stop and have those
Totally.
conversations ahead of time, or how do we make sure we stay on top of that for people?
It's kind of fascinating if we
Hmm.
maybe if we rewind 10 years from this point.
Hmm.
I think if we were to ask kids, maybe Gen Z, the first generation to go through puberty with a smartphone in their hand, if
Hmm.
we asked them, what was that like? I think we could get stories where
Yeah.
it could
Yeah.
be pretty interesting, right? Just to see how they've experienced the last 10 years, the last 5 years, let's say. When I
Hmm.
work in schools, I usually ask them a number of questions and I get them to write their answers on sticky notes. And
Hmm.
so one of the questions is, what is one thing you wish the adults in your life knew about you?
Oh, I
And
bet you get amazing
the
answers.
answers are
Yeah.
astounding. It's
Huh.
things like, if I'm quiet, it doesn't mean I'm sad.
Kids are so profound, aren't they sometimes?
Profound.
Like so insightful,
So
and they
good.
just come out with these things. You're like, wow.
Or things like,
Huh.
if I'm making just because some teenagers make bad choices doesn't mean that I am. Like just really good stuff. Like there was another
Yep.
one that stood out to me
Yep.
a lot actually, which was I will put more pressure on myself more than anyone around me ever will. I wish my parents knew how much I love them. Things like that. And
Yeah.
again, a piece of paper and a writing utensil and one
Mm-hmm.
question
Mm-hmm.
can get kids accessing that
Mm-hmm.
social health piece that I'm talking about, right? That sort of sense of
Mm-hmm.
vulnerability and
Mm-hmm.
the reciprocity, what to have someone on the other end receive it.
Mm-hmm.
And so as soon as I collect this bin of sticky notes and I ask them, okay, who wants me to read them out? Everyone's like, yes,
Yes.
please read them out because they
Yeah.
want that they want that correlation. They want that sense of
Mm-hmm.
I need verification that I'm not alone. I need
Mm-hmm.
to see that my experiences are not just mine, but I need to also see myself in other people's stories.
Well, yes. Well,
Mm.
and it's interesting because some of those examples you gave sort of highlight that idea of like those, what I hear is kids who don't feel a connection to the adults, right? Of like, because there's that disconnect and they're like, I just wish they knew this. And it kind of goes back to that piece of how do we, yes, how do we keep those relationships?
And the
Mm,
best part about that exercise, well, one of the best parts is that it's also anonymous. So they
sure.
don't have to, of course, attach their name or identity to it.
Yep.
And so then in the parent evenings that I typically do with families, I bring it. I bring the information and I say, this is what the kids are saying. And I call them parent potions, but the parents want to know just as much as the kids want to talk about it, right?
Right.
And so it sort of surfaces this really important conversation about how we can't change what we don't talk about and
Yeah.
how we can't attempt to even intervene on something that we're not connected to. Once we have more information, then suddenly we can transform our thinking about how we're going to strategize or problem solve around it.
Hmm. And sometimes it's just that opening with curiosity
Yeah.
of, just letting people, yeah, it's incredible what you get if you ask sometimes.
And
Yes.
so with the
Hmm.
middle schoolers, I ask a different question. I ask them,
Okay.
what is one thing that you need to hear from a grown up in your life?
Oh.
And what comes back, I mean, shouldn't shock us, but it always shocks me.
Mm.
Things like, I see you trying really hard, or I'm not mad at you, or I want you to know that I love you so much.
Right.
Hey, how was your day today?
Right.
There's so many those little pieces, right, that can
Yeah.
fall away when we have really busy lives, or we're really stressed out, or we're not taking care
Hmm.
of, our own stuff or our own
Yep.
piece of the puzzle that of course
Yep.
this stuff falls away and then therefore that co-regulation piece just is offline.
Yeah. It's that cup full piece of how do you keep recharging so you have enough. You have done a lot with your practice. So you have your practice, you teach, you educate, you podcast, you write, you do research. What is one thing right now that you are working on that like really excites you?
I am currently in the process of writing a book. And it turns out this whole process is sort of fascinating. The process of writing the book has been quite interesting because I at first I thought, and what I first pitched was I want to write a book about how exactly what we're talking about, how technology is changing our relationships with each other.
Okay.
And what has emerged in the process of writing the book is the big piece of this conversation, which is one about co-regulation and what is lost in our to our relationship with technology. The reality is that phones are not going away, screens are not going away.
Hmm.
And so I'm really kind of pivoting my work at the moment to figure out how can we sit in the paradox of two things being true at the same time.
Mm.
And I think that relational paradox has become quite a challenge that I'm undertaking in writing this book. So I have this concept called connection crash,
Okay.
where it's defined by the three Ds: distraction, disconnection, and distress. sort of built on this idea that we're the most connected technically we've ever been, and we're the most disconnected at the same time. How could that possibly be?
Hmm.
And what's sort of emerging is actually more of a journey than anything. So I'm not coming in as the experts to say, here's what you do, step one, two, three.
Right.
I'm talking about my own use. I'm talking about my own life. I'm talking about my own relationships with technology. And I'm talking about, with permission, my clients and the kids that I work with in schools, and talking about what I'm seeing. And so it's more of a journey. It's more of a formation around what I think we can do to hold these two competing truths at the same time, which is that technology isn't going anywhere, but we still need each other, and we still need
Yes.
to live lives that are satisfactory and quote unquote healthy.
Yes.
So I'm hoping to open up a bigger cultural conversation about our dependence on our devices and how it's taking over our relationship
Mhm.
capacities. Yeah.
I love that you're asking these questions because I think they need to be put out there into the world. And oh yeah, I can't wait to read that.
Yeah, it's exciting. And
Yeah.
it's sort of this other big question too that I'm sitting through, which is that, like, do we really need our phones? And
Mm.
what exactly are we doing here? I'm sort of interrogating a bigger conversation, I think.
Mhm.
And maybe I run the risk of
Mm.
opening up too big a conversation about, like, profit motives and capitalism, and how,
Sure.
of course, they're trying to, of course, get our attention on our screen so that they make money.
Yep.
But
Yep.
I'm more kind of thinking about, like, what is lost to our development, and what will happen if we don't do anything different.
Well, if you come up with the answer that no, we don't,
Yeah,
I'm
I
here for
know.
that. I'm here for that too, because I, more often than not, I will, like, I won't wear my watch. I'll leave my phone at home. And those are like my favorite times when
Isn't that
when I
so
just go
interesting?
out. And because I remember as a kid being out, and if you weren't home, you were just out, and people would wait for you to get home.
Oh my
And,
gosh.
I think, well,
It's so fascinating, right? Because I'm at this one part in the book where I'm writing about one of the strategies that I think has helped me,
mm,
which is um to give my phone a nap, basically, and put it
right.
to bed so that I don't have to actually take care of it.
Yep.
But in a lot of ways, it is like a little baby that I feel like I'm always sort of having to tend to.
Yes.
And it doesn't grow up, it doesn't get older, it doesn't mature, it doesn't, become, self
No.
driving. It doesn't do its thing. And
No,
so,
it forever needs attention.
oh my
Yes.
gosh, it needs so
Hmm.
much attention. And I feel as though it's becoming a primary co-regulator for many kids and
Mm.
many adults. And that's sort of my main thesis, is that
Yep.
we're never going to reach the place where it's fully independent,
Mm.
until, of course, the technology evolves. But
Yes.
I worry about that.
Very
Yeah.
cool. That's a big undertaking. Yeah.
It is. It is. And I don't have a title yet, but I'm just sort of leaving it to the project, and I think
Yeah.
the title will reveal itself.
Well, I want to finish with a question that I ask everybody. And because it's around this idea of exception seeking. And so one of the pieces I was most interested in starting this podcast and having these conversations was, how we can so often sometimes just be within our own narrative of how things are. And then we become really good at finding information to fit that narrative. And sometimes it's just finding little exceptions here or there to show us something else might be true. And so I'm really interested in people and stories of people who have kind of been doing something and maybe looked for a little exception and followed a different path to do something different. And I see you very much as that of how you're kind of just continually finding those exception doors. And so it's a two-part question. And the first is, when do you think you first started to realize that you saw things differently than other people? And then when you look back, what was it, do you think? What were your experiences that gave you kind of that like courage or confidence to then take that path less traveled?
I think, as I was saying before, co-regulation is that prerequisite for self-regulation.
Hmm.
In a lot of ways, I also think that community is also a big prerequisite for authenticity. And so I think that my authenticity, which is really what I hear you asking about, is like,
Hmm.
how can you, authentically sort of express and drive down the road that you need to drive
Yes.
down.
Yes.
I feel as though my people, my community have really shaped my nervous system. And so I think about
Mm,
my hometown, my small town that I grew up in. I also grew up in a family of six, and so I felt like I grew up in a little mini village, in a little mini
mm,
community from day one. And so I always was learning a lot about things like reciprocity and sharing and
mm.
developing healthy beliefs about oneself and about our group. And so I think that part of where I really started to realize this was on the playground at recess. As a young kid, this is interesting, but I used to think
Yeah.
I was magic. I used to think that I had this like rare ability to like think two and three and four steps ahead. It turns out I was just doing pattern recognition. So I was always kind of getting to know, what kids were doing or what they were thinking or what they would say. And so I felt like I had this like superpower. And so I felt like really strongly that like, okay, no one else seems to be able to do this, or no one's really tapping into this like superpower that I think we all have.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to essentially like play therapist on the playground. Like I would help people solve their problems. I would help my siblings kind of resolve conflict. I would teach my sister how to read. Like I just always had this like strong pull
Mm-hmm.
towards helping other people. And I felt as though I was using my superpowers to do that. It turns out that, and my mom used to say this a lot. She used to say, Jacob, you have a white light around you. I don't know what that means, but you have this like white light around you. And so I always felt this sort of sense of like a connection to something just like bigger than myself. And it turns out, I think what I was tapping into was just my nervous system's really strong pull to like be part of a group and to be part of, again, that something bigger. And so I think that I really started to come to terms with that through my queer identity and through understanding who I am just in general, just in a lot of my identities. But I think that that was sort of where my more bold action stance comes from. That sort of sense of like,
Okay.
well, whatever, we'll just move fast and break things. It's fine. It's all fine. Like we can clean up the mess if we create one. It's gonna
Mm-hmm.
be fine.
Mm-hmm.
If I make a wrong choice or if I take a wrong turn, then okay, I can go back and I can redo it. And so I think it comes from the permission that I just learned to just give myself first, to just
Mm-hmm.
try things out and to take the leap
Mm-hmm.
and to see like what would be the worst case scenario. And it hasn't really steered me wrong since. So I guess like these spidey senses, these like superpowers, these sort of
Yeah.
sense, like I'm often predicting things. And so I do a lot of like, this is what I think the next conversation or the next thing we need to be
Yes.
focused on is. And so I think that's sort of where it comes from.
That paints such a beautiful and kind of hilarious little image of you on a playground,
Oh yeah.
and just I picture, a lineup of people to help and just this idea of,
It was
yeah,
under
your
the
white
slide, by the
light.
way.
It's
It was
under
under
the
the slide. Yeah.
mm-hmm. And
That
it's
was
a
my
lot of
office.
serious stuff happens under slides. There you go.
Yeah.
That is a good office space.
That was my office for sure.
Yes. Oh, I love that with your own village.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so
Yeah.
I think I always just felt these like
Mm-hmm.
little tentacles and these little tethers to other people, and I always just sort of felt like a connector. I always sort of just felt like
Mm-hmm.
I, in a lot of ways, had X-ray vision on what was going on here. I was just always sort of like, and very quickly, very early, I realized, oh, everyone's performing something, and it's not that serious,
Hmm.
and we're all just sort of out here like just trying our best
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
trying our best to sort of like wear the clothes and do the thing and
Mm-hmm.
um and perform the role that we think we have to do. And I just released myself from that
Yeah.
the performance pressure.
Gives a lightness to it.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
allows me to just be me,
And
which
isn't
is
that just
yeah,
a gift? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
I
it's
love
it's so
that.
free, it's so freeing too, so liberating to just make decisions and decide for yourself like what you're going to do. And I
Mm-hmm.
understand,
Mm-hmm.
not everyone has that ability or the resources to do that. So I understand that that's also,
Yep.
of course, deeply
Yep.
part of that conversation. But
Yep.
I think that like things like moving out of my small town and
Mm-hmm.
going out on my own and like, quitting jobs, staying in jobs,
Mm-hmm.
all of that. Yeah, I learned a lot from those processes.
I will just have to like talk more. There's so much that I would still love to hear after your book, maybe.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly. I'll be
yeah,
back.
we'll do it again.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Thank you for this and your time and all you are doing, because I think, what you're putting out there for people to learn and start conversations, I think is really important. So I appreciate you doing what you do out there.
I
Thanks.
just want to say thank you to you too. I mean, for as long as I've known you, you've always been someone where I feel like I can find your squishy middle. And I just feel like I'm constantly in search of the people who I can like see their squishy middle. And so
Oh.
yeah, it's been great to be in conversation with you.
There are so many ideas that I am taking away from that conversation with Jake. And I think, as someone who works really closely with young people and also lives with a young person, his pieces around self regulation, co regulation, and this idea of, can I generate enough calm to let someone borrow it, I think is one of the pieces that I am going to continue to think about and try to learn how to do, because I think it's really hard. And I have been in so many situations where I definitely do not have calm that I could share, let alone give enough of for myself. And so I think that's something that I will think about. And so if that's one that you're thinking about too, give us a shout. Let us know, how are you doing it? What kind of resources do you need? How could we help? Because I think it's a really big piece. And, if the world could manage emotions in a way that's a little more skillful and productive, maybe that would be a nicer place for all of us. And the other one was just around this idea of active or passive use of technology. And I think sometimes as a parent, I often worry about, am I giving someone too much screen time? What does that look like? How am I going to navigate when they want a phone, or what that is? And, I have the advantage of, my child is still young enough that, we're not quite there yet. So I've got some time to try to figure this out, but it's certainly on my mind. And I think, how he helps to differentiate that, it is here and there are ways to use it that are beneficial for me, just takes away some of the pressure that I feel of having to make a decision right now. And honestly, it takes away a little bit of the guilt that I feel of sometimes thinking, oh, shoot, am I using this too much? And so, even of my own use, and so I liked that. It was ideas. I walked away thinking it's ideas without criticism, which I appreciate. So those are my thoughts. Would love to hear yours. And as you go about your week, I hope you can find some exceptions. Thanks for listening to Exception Seekers. Tune in again as we continue to seek overlooked stories that offer new perspectives, disrupt limiting beliefs, and inspire transformative approaches to nurturing youth mental health.
This podcast was produced by North Star Networks, the guiding light for progressive media.